Hello, and welcome to our web seminar, The Future of Testing, Trends, Tactics, and Predictions, sponsored by Perfecto and featuring our speakers Diego Giudice, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research, and Tzvika Shahaf, Senior Director of Product Management at Perfecto. I'm your host today, Beth Romanek. Thanks for joining us. Before I hand it over to our speakers, let me explain the screen you see in front of you. All three windows can be moved around and resized. At the bottom of your screen, you'll also see a widget toolbar. By clicking that Handouts widget in the middle, the one that looks like a piece of paper, you can download a PDF of the speaker's slides and an ebook from Perfecto. If you have any technical issues, please let us know by typing in the Questions and Answers window on the left. This is, of course, also how you can ask questions. If we have time, there will be a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. This web seminar is being recorded and will be made available to watch on demand later. Once the recording is ready, we'll send you an email with instructions about how you can watch the web seminar. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to our speakers.
Thank you. Hello, Diego. Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. Thank you, and good afternoon to whoever is in the side of the world that I am in.
Great. So let's talk together a little bit about the agenda that we have today. Again, I'm really honored to have you with us as one of the leading analysts at Forrester, and the focus area that you bring. I really appreciate and admire, the kind of insights that you have into our industry and to testing at all, and be really exciting, to hear your kind of point of view on the industry today. On the agenda, we have three main topics that would like, to discover today. Where continuous testing is, like what are the trends and challenges and where the market is at the moment. What is the right combination of continuous testing and AI, and how this technology, besides just being a buzzword, can really help closing some of the gaps that we, jointly identify in the market. And, to use this, special time of the year also to try and think together about 2019 and even beyond, and see where continuous testing is really going to, and how test automation will evolve, and try to talk a little bit about predictions. And of course, should time permit, to try and cover some of the answers that we'll get from the audience. So without further ado, I'll let you, of course, Diego, start by sharing some of your insights and your understanding about the market today.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tzvika. And yes, it's always a pleasure to share some of the testing. As you know, is 50% of my research agenda, if not more. I spend a lot of time on it, and especially intersect it with some of the other interesting trends that are happening in the market, like Agile, like DevOps, and now lately also artificial intelligence. But anyway, so let's get started. And I guess application development delivery teams have never been under pressure as much as they are under pressure right now, because of that digital transformation that everybody talks about. I think today lots of companies talk about digital acceleration. I think everybody kind of gets it, that this is the digital age, but we see from the data, and clients know, that it's not happening as fast as everybody would like it to happen. And at the same time, this also has to do a lot with customer experience, right? I mean, basically, we are striving to build better software faster, and that better means more engaging, giving clients an enjoying experience, right? And that all that pressure, guess who that goes on? It goes on to the app dev teams, which are now becoming kind of, developers are the gods of IT organizations these days. And I guess, that also, what are some of the key topics that everybody talks about? And I would say not anymore just talks about, but actually are trying to to do things in a different way, to build software in a different way. The key paradigm shift is about moving towards more agile and DevOps and continuous delivery, right? And the interesting thing is that in continuous software delivery, as you can see here, right, test is right in the middle of the hurricane. And it is. It is, and it requires major changes from an organizational perspective, from a people, from the type of roles that are needed, from the type of practices that people, use, and it's all about automation as well. Well, it's not only about automation, but definitely automation is key, because that's what's key in DevOps. That's what's key in a continuous delivery pipeline like this, where everything happens in very short iterations, right? With going from ideation, planning, to building, to checking in code, testing the code, releasing it, and then some of the more smarter people use really DevOps for what it's really worth, which is being able to leverage feedback from production. And in between something like that, testing is can't be the usual afterthought activity done at the end and done from some separated team that is not involved deeply into the software development lifecycle. And so I've been writing a lot about in the last 5 years about these changes, and slowly seeing them pick up. But let's take a look at some of the data and some of the results of the research on where the industry is really heading with testing. Where are we, at least at this point in time? And so this is, I run every 2 years a very interesting, I find it interesting at least, a very interesting panel around agile adoption at scale. And I would call it, the way I see agile and DevOps is really two sides of the same coin. You can't really talk about one without referring to the other, right? And so there's some interesting questions in that questionnaire. And this is for organizations and for actually for professionals that are in the journey of agile. So these are, some of the most, let's say, expert customers that we can talk to, and to find out what is it that they're doing with agile, and what, in this specific question, what are the barriers, the key barriers. And you can see that, of course, we all know that one of the top issues with adopting agile is actually that cultural change. But when it comes to testing, when it comes to more of the engineering tasks, skills is an issue, right? There's a lack of skills in what I call downstream agile or DevOps itself, where testing is happening, right? Where continuous integration, where CI, continuous integration, continuous testing is happening. There's lack of skills in terms of agile testing practices, like exploratory testing. There's lack of skills on really how to automate, going beyond, record and replay type of approaches, and automating now a more complex structured architecture with web services, with applications that are not just on browsers, but on devices. And the complexity just becomes bigger and bigger with the skills. And along with that, of course, what our surveyed people tell us is that also automation is a challenge because of lack of tools. Maybe they haven't adopted the right tools, or the tools don't enable them fully to do what they want to do. And this is automation across the board, right? In continuous software delivery, there's lots of automation happening, not just for testing, but also managing the whole process, orchestrating the process, and so forth. So this is actually a different research. This is the research of I do a WAVE, which is the vendor positioning of omni-channel testing tools, or tools that are that enable teams to automate in a continuous delivery pipeline functional testing across any type of device. That's why we call it omni-channel. Be it a mobile, be it a web, be it a client server, be it even something different. And the 15 top customers, top vendors, and Perfecto is among one of those, end up in this wave, and they each bring me some clients that I can survey, and you can see that. So these are supposed to be pretty, I would say, mature clients, right? Coming from the top 15 test automation tool vendors in the marketplace. And you can see that the question asked is, what level of functional test automation has your organization achieved since you've been using the vendor's product that I was evaluating in the last 12 months? It's a little bit all over the place. If you look at it, there's even organizations that have, 17% are basically claiming less than 20% automation. A question that really rises there is, how can you really be delivering fast if you are still with 20% of your automation in testing? But there's also guys that, go well above the 80%. So, proving that some of it can be done, but there's different reasons for these numbers, to be honest. But the question and the issue is, we're not really still automating as much as we should and as much as we need to. The world quality report from Capgemini of 2018 shows for them the number of test automation is below 20%. Now, so my numbers are a bit better because, of course, I'm just surveying agile teams, right? The world quality report goes out to a broader base. This is again back to my agile survey, and you can see that this also shows that from 2015 to 2017, in all of these automation areas, from unit testing, functional testing, functional testing going beyond the user interface, functional testing using UI-led type of approaches, non-functional testing like performance and integration testing and test environment provisioning, it's kind of flat. It's not improving much. It's higher than what the World Quality Report says. Again, these are a privileged number of 230 professionals that are trying to adopt Agile. That are adopting Agile, so you have to expect some level of automation, but it's kind of over 2 years, it's pretty flat except for environment provisioning. And the other interesting data point is that, again, going from 2015 to 2017, the amount of manual testing hasn't really diminished much. It's gone from 49% to 46%. Right, so I guess you can see where I'm going with this. And this is interesting. The reason why I'm bringing performance up as an additional point here is because I'm actually getting a lot of inquiries around this. 36% of my inquiries, and I do 60 to 80 inquiries every quarter over the last year. A lot of them are around performance testing, and I guess the question is why. And the question is why, and I guess the answer is pretty obvious. I mean, as we go more into the distributed mobile world, IoT, IoT world, and the multiple devices, performance becomes more of an issue. There's more attention to it, but also because with CI/CD, people are starting to realize that early on, I can not only just do functional testing, but I can probably start having an idea of how my performance is going to play out. There's also, of course, a huge issue when you move just from, if you think that cross-browser testing is still kind of something you're struggling with, although I think we're getting better at it, think about what's happening in the mobile device space world, right? I mean, this is not new. It's there's so many devices, there's so many different operating systems. It's just mind-boggling on how many different types of devices and combinations we would need to test if we really want to do something at global scale, and you've got applications that are used all over the world. And, if you look at what DevOps, this is a little bit more of a technical compared to the previous slide of DevOps, of continuous delivery, but the continuous delivery cycle has, holistically would include something like 17 to 18 types of different tools that need to be integrated at the enterprise level to support the details of going through all these different steps, right? From ideation to building code to unit testing and automating the unit test to doing static code analysis for some security to going through functional testing and automating some of that, to release automation and so forth. And, you know, if you think, and if you thought that test automation was already hard as something to achieve, think about obtaining that type of automation in a continuous delivery, and where speed is becoming important, more important. And of course, really, when I say speed, I should also say that it's quality at speed. That's what we're really aiming at. That's what most companies are aiming at. Testing is just all over the place. And I think the industry is realizing that now, right? Testing starts earlier. We talk about shift left, you know, testing, and testers and developers get to work together and so forth. But the question is, you know, is there a role for artificial intelligence to support this level of complexity, this growing complexity? Now, I don't want to, you know, I don't have time to go into the details of each box here, but these, you know, the point I wanted to make is that AI these days, compared to what it used to be, is a lot focused around this machine learning box, right? That you can see analytics, predictive analytics, and deep learning neural networks. I'm going to have to assume you have kind of an idea of how that works. It's very probabilistic, lots of math. And these systems, I think the big difference is that you don't write code the way you do today, thinking about the recipe. You write code that is learning, right? Systems that are learning to learn. And that's the cool thing about this new way of doing AI. And deep learning as a technology and machine learning as a technology is really purposely supporting other types of technologies in AI, going from natural language processing to audio, image, and video processing, to knowledge representation, which, as you will see, are kind of the type of technologies that are starting to be used to improve testing. So I started this, you know, doing research by going out, reaching out to lots of the vendors, to reaching out to most of the system integrators, and you'll see also reaching out to end users and developers across the world with surveys. And about a year and a half ago, I published this research. So I'm looking at AI, but not from a business perspective in terms of solving operational business issues, but how can AI help in the software development lifecycle? And you can see that although I was interested in seeing this happening, you know, focusing a little bit more on testing, that when I asked that question to organizations, to smart people, to gurus that I consider in the marketplace, testing and deploy were kind of the two areas with a very high interest for applying AI. And you can read, you know, the other areas, what we're doing, what's happening with AI in some of the areas like, you know, ideation and planning, or requirements, you know, suggesting reuse opportunities and cleaning up requirements and test cases, automating code generation in the IDEs. Microsoft is doing a lot of that. But really the interest, and deploy, everybody, you know, there is an interesting focus around AI ops and all that stuff. And yes, that is also happening. So basically applying and using machine learning in DevOps more broadly. But what I was interested in, what we're interested in this conversation is what is it that in the testing space people are looking at? Well, I reached out to over 3,000 developers, and 37% of them came back claiming that they were using AI and machine learning to test better and faster to increase quality. Now, of that 37%, I went further on and said, okay, so you told me you are using AI for quality. Can you tell me what you're doing with it? And you can see that basically they're doing three major things. One is using AI and machine learning to kind of optimize the overall test process. There's lots of optimization that we can do in the overall testing process. The second thing is about really around bug management and issue management. And this kind of goes into the ops side as well, right? Using machine learning to prevent incidents in production is one direct answer here. And the third area is a little bit around improving automation, right? You can see 26% in that area, but most of the focus is in the other three areas. Now, one thing I wanted to say is that 37% is high. And so I opened up that number a little bit to see what was going on behind the scenes, and found out that, you know, it was a regional thing. Asia Pac that number, the percentages goes up to 61%. If you go into the United States, that number goes down to 29, 28%. If you come to Europe, the people that are using AI and machine learning that claim are using machine learning to improve quality goes down to around 20, between 23 and 27%. And I think the most important thing, and out of my research, and I'm not going to, so I'm basically preparing the ground here for Tzvika for his part, but I'm here for questions later on, is that really AI should be seen as something that augments individuals and not for replacement, not for total replacement of individuals, right? It's about intelligence augmentation. And this is actually a figure that comes from a colleague of mine that does research in general for AI in terms of business use of AI, which happened to be right coincident with what I found from the testing research, that basically AI is going to augment testers, right? And AI in general is very good at things like delivering, insights. It has a superhuman ability in doing that, right? It's much better than us in processing huge amounts of data and very quickly finding powerful combinations and patterns and correlations that we could never find. I mean, probably we could never find, or if we could, it would take us too long. The same thing is about automating standard processes. That's the RPA world, which has exploded, and RPA with intelligence. So effectively tackling tasks that you feel kind of, that are repetitive, and we don't need to do, we can use our bright minds for other stuff. But where AI doesn't do a good augmentation is in the uncertainty and in where we need to use our judgment, where we need to be very creative. But actually, it could augment that creativity with data that we can then use for testing better. And so the way I want to end my bit, and then we'll come back to going deeper into some of the use cases together with Tzvika, is that I guess the question is, can AI therefore really augment testers' intelligence? And can it augment testers' intelligence in the different roles, right? Developers, for example, could be augmented with generation of unit tests. Or maybe technical testers, which are kind of, the biggest group of testers that I see, which like to use tools. They can use graphical and scriptless, but they also don't mind using scripting, but they're not coders like developers. That's a huge target for AI, perhaps. But even business testers, in other words, subject matter experts that can now do testing because the tools are abstracting the complexity away from them. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tzvika and to continue the conversation and talk to you later, maybe with question and answering and after Tzvika's call. Thank you for your attention. Tzvika, back to you.
Thank you very much, Diego. One question that I really like to share now, if you don't mind. You were talking, about DevOps and, kind of illustrating, the combination of, tools, people, and processes like agile processes, which are the three main, I would say, kind of ingredients of a DevOps. Where do you see in this area the biggest challenge and the impact of AI? I think it's one of the questions that you ended up with, but where do you see the biggest impact of AI for testing in these areas?
So,
if I may take you back to your discussion for a second.
That's wonderful. No, that's cool. I mean, if you look at this from a strategic perspective, it's what I call the optimization area. I guess the question is, we have to kind of break up the question a little bit, because there are areas where I think AI is still a myth and trying to address, but it could be a great solution to the problem. But it's a could, because not mature enough yet in some areas. But there's the reality today where it can be used, right? And so that kind of changes things a little bit. If you don't consider that for a moment, the area that I do see, one is optimization of the overall test management process. A simple a simple use case there is that digital EMC, DEC EMC that needs to configure their hardware that they sell, and they configuring that hardware. There's with software and firmware, there's like something over 3 trillion possible combinations, and to test those combinations, it would take them literally, with the resources they have, years. I think they estimated something like 17 years or something, right? So that's definitely not doable. Yeah. So using machine learning and building a model, what they did is they optimized this, and the model helped them find the 500-600 most important configurations that they should test. And that's how they went about it. So reducing the time it took to a fraction of days and weeks rather than years, right? And that's a very smart way of using machine learning in testing. That's the overall. But then you've got the other areas, as you can see, that you go more into the nuts and bolts of the automation and supporting the different roles and developers in building their the automation bit is another area as well. And and I guess I don't want to anticipate all the stuff that you're gonna be showing too. But if you wanted me to point to, I'd be happy to. But anyway, I think overall, from a strategic perspective, optimization of the processes where a lot of people are looking at AI, together with together with improving automation, I guess, especially vendors like yourself, right? It depends also. System integrators look at certain things, and end users have a lot of pain with increasing automation. But I think we need to start thinking differently about augmentation. I guess that's my finding.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Diego, for these insights and market overview and how you and Forrester see the impact of AI here on Agile and DevOps. And of course, we'll talk a little bit more and and have some more goodies at the end of this presentation, talking together a little bit about predictions. I would like at this point, just to add on some of the issues that you were discussing earlier. So in this reality, continuous testing for digital is becoming more and more complex as new interfaces, new types of testing are being added, user experiences developing and emerging in different areas. But back to the basic, and one of the issues that you mentioned, you were talking about, give or take, half of the testing population that basically still test in manual fashion, or other teams that are kind of blocked from uplifting their level of automation into a higher degree and really to be able to unlock continuous testing. And the point of view that we at Perfecto have on the market and testing as a whole is kind of similar. And I would like to share the way that we see on how AI can really impact. But reality is that automation is really hard. It is unreliable in many cases, and we hear many users complain about significant amount of noise that is created due to false negatives. Some test result that has nothing to do with the functional aspect of the application under test, but just noise that is created from different reasons in the background. Other would say that getting the feedback takes too long. You mentioned the skill set, and it's clear that in order to build a stable and sustainable, some of them at some point your automation is not as reliable as you expect it to be. Many of the organization would like to focus more on innovation and less on fixing things that are not working, on testing, and to be able to qualify new features faster. And the level of automation in some cases does not allow that, because they are required to automate advanced use cases or interfaces. Can be, for example, facial recognition as part of any flow, or fingerprint, or even advanced cases beyond that require special architecture or kind of hybrid architecture, as an example. Managing the environment is becoming another blocker for some users that really wish to remove some of the overhead and focus more, again, on testing and less on setting IT environment or building their kind of testing grid. Another important feedback is really, the need to better understand why some of the tests are failing and get, the automation really back to that green as part of the always green approach, the desired state that, that users are talking about. In many cases, when we meet, new customers and prospects that we talk with, the common phrase that I would probably hear is that, we invested a lot of time and a lot of dollars, and yet, we see significant amount of failures and flakiness is everywhere. That at any given moment, they are lacking an idea about the real status of their testing environment. And they got more data that, that they know what actually to do with, that it still takes like forever to get feedback. And it's really difficult to maintain the testing environment as things are breaking all over. So, the negative consequence of that is that automation is probably slow or at low rate for those enterprises. The testing cycle takes hours, and in today's reality, you want to decrease that and shrink that into minutes. And that lot of noise and negative, false negative results or noise interfere the process, and of course the overhead is killing. So we have divided like 3 main areas that I think that are kind of mapped to those challenges. There are lab maintenance and lab kind of setup elements that can be improved using AI technology. Both in the creation, where we are addressing kind of the skill set and the ability to do things better and automate better using AI, and of course to validate better. There is plenty of room for AI to really impact the market, and we see some trends around this, as you mentioned earlier, Diego, happening in this area. In the execution, I think that orchestration and, in addition to that, different types of impact testing and the ability really to reduce the number of tests that should be executed, as the example that you shared about millions of combinations that potentially can be tested, but with 500 we can basically cover the entire affected area that was required to be tested before qualifying a new functionality. So the notion of what is being changed and how my ultimate test suite should look like is definitely a room where AI and machine learning can really, groundbreak the level of testing and improve the quality. And on the reporting and the visibility kind of layer, as I've mentioned earlier, a lot of noise and a lot of time is being spent on triaging and understanding what's not working, and conduct the root cause analysis in order to find significant problems during testing. And in these areas, both the triaging and the analytics, AI can really make the difference and allow continuous testing to take place, as significant amount of time can be saved, and using advanced technology can optimize the testing process. So these are the 3 areas that we at Perfecto see as the kind of high impact areas, fully aligned with the way that you kind of describe the impact of AI, and where are the trends and our discussions with different testing teams and agile teams. The first area that we are focused and we understand that can really make a difference is how to optimize the automation from the lab side. So dealing with mobile devices today and other IoT elements, is really an area where there is a big friction. Think about how many times the mobile device that you have in hand is disconnecting from even the home or the office Wi-Fi network. The impact of that is that any automated test that can be executed on that device will fail, but it will fail not from a functional reason, from a true reason, but from a technical issue of network connectivity, which is fair, but still the impact will be on almost every test or almost every build that is running overnight, that as part of that nightly build, and the impact is crucial. Other area is device locks and dealing with passcodes and other elements that that should be automated, for example, but if they are blocked for the user, it means that again automation is a mess in that sense. The last item is how to improve reboots of devices, or how can we use AI to basically learn patterns of devices, as we're still talking about hardware, and this hardware has different behaviors that we can monitor, identify, and react when we identify specific cases, to make sure that we get the device back to ready mode and make sure that the next test in line as part of the continuous testing will actually hit a device that is available and in ready mode for test execution. So in simple word, what we're looking at today, where AI can really help, is to self-heal those devices, those friction points that we see at the lab, and improve or uplift the level of automation to a more of a stable level, and really build automation that can work and can sustain, given the fact that the lab is more accessible, more available to run those automation tests. Another area is addressing exactly the area that you were mentioning earlier, Diego, which is the level of skill set that we see among automation in the market. So there is a clear need, and there is a growing trend of making automation easier, making automation more affordable, not in the dollar side, but in the minimal requirement that users should have in order to be part of this growing trend, to be able to join the party and really have automation that works. So the biggest issue, and I will talk more in details about that, of course, is object handling and addressing, which is one of the blockers for automation today, to have really sustainable and effective automation, to reduce the flakiness that we all aware of. So easy test automation and creation is one piece, to be able to use those kind of drag and drop or record and play mode. But the other side is also to maintain those scripts and make sure that the next time, after that, some kind of change in the UI and in object addressing has been changed, that the test will adopt, using AI mechanism, those changes to make sure that the script will run and will pass, not and will not experience some kind of flakiness in this area. The second layer is to have really a web-based IDE, which means that the user does not require to have any kind of automation skills in coding, and will be able also to debug any kind of script easily, or for the system to conduct that for the user. And the third layer, of course, is when we think about continuous testing, the fact that I've created the script once is not the entire story. I want to make sure that this script will run in a scheduled mode from time to time, that will take under consideration different priorities in terms of testing. For example, that any kind of integration test will take higher priority on top of any unit test that I have, or between different business units that I have, I'll have better clarity about what gets, priority in the pipe or in the queue. And these things, when we think about CI, even CI is not kind of affordable for everyone today. It's getting there. It's better than what we saw in the market, I think, in 2015, as you showed earlier, Diego. But still, there are gaps, and continuous integration, continuous testing was not really unlocked by all teams, and skill set is one of the elements. And by using different test management capabilities, this is really a good way to overcome these obstacles. We at Perfecto are looking at codeless Selenium solution that will allow users to leverage the capabilities of AI into test automation. We have selected one of the leading tools in the market that really allow this functionality. We understand the trend, and we know that the need is growing. As just said, the level of test automation is not growing, and this glass ceiling is something that we also should break somehow and allow our users to uplift their level of automation. We truly believe that this kind of solution should not be based on a proprietary output, but go with open source tool and align together with the fact that Selenium is the leading tool in web testing. So we'll shortly announce a formal product functionality around codeless Selenium, and again, one of the best, I think, tools in the market is being added to our kind of offering these days. Another layer that I think that's worth mentioning, and this is the analysis area or the optimization that you were referring earlier, Diego. So we have conducted kind of an overview on the market. We looked at Perfecto's customer, and we looked beyond Perfecto's customer on a wider angle of enterprises that conduct continuous testing. And we're looking, at success rate level, and we're trying to understand where the market is. So I think that, similar to the level of automation and the level of manual testing, we see also kind of an issue around the success rate. And the success rate is not that glorious. Give or take, an average organization will be at kind of 52% success rate, which, contains all those elements of the false negatives and the flaky aspect of testing. The good news is that 80% of these issues usually have a pattern. And if we need to break it down, as I mentioned earlier, scripting and object handling, some kind of coding skills that can be missing, some issues that are related to timeouts. Again, it's a subset of issues that are related to object handling, contains 50% of the problem that we see. And these are mainly the functional failures that we see in the market. On the right side of this pie chart, we see the false negatives, or the issues that create a lot of noise. So lab management, as I mentioned before, network or device connectivity, the stability of the lab and lock scenarios can be an issue. When I say stability of the lab, it's mainly the physical devices that tend from time to time to get into error state, or to different trace conditions within the device, things that related in many cases to the hardware and the software that is running on that hardware. And the last piece is orchestration, is how test automation is built, queuing mechanism, and other aspect that ends up in many cases where automation is trying to hit a device that is already in use or disconnected from different reason. The impact of a single device in some cases that that can be disconnected can basically create failures among any kind of build that we will execute, and will create a lot of noise. When we'll go back to our reports after a nightly regression, we'll see red dots almost everywhere, and those are, usually related to a specific device, or in other cases to a specific test that failed. Getting those breadcrumbs and understanding from that point that there is an issue with the device takes a lot of time for organization today to get there. So if I need to ask the big questions around, those failures that I've just reviewed, on the left side, the question that I would usually ask is what's wrong with my script? And on the right side, I would usually ask what's wrong with my lab or with my execution. And we took a stab on these issues, and we're looking on how AI can really uplift those questions. And we looked even beyond that on where the machine learning part can really help improving that by recognizing objects. And this is, one of the valid directions that we're looking at, and understanding if there is a recurring issue regarding one of the identifiers or with one of the objects that we see. Areas that are related more to accessibility, like transcribing speech within pages, make decision-making process easier by learning data. For example, if there is an area that suffers from stability issues and we see a recurring problem there, it also related to the next item of trends or patterns that we see. How can test automation be impacted from this area? And other cases that can go to other types of testing, for example, security testing. Can we identify specific kind of vulnerabilities or issues that requires more attention? Machine learning, technology, and the ability to look deeper into the details, to the data that is being generated from continuous testing across the board. It doesn't really matter if the test is functional or non-functional, accessibility or performance, security, or different kind of monitoring in production. All those aspects, the common element is really the data, and to be able to massage that data and to understand from the data what are the top impact problems of testing. This is really the key. This is really the challenge. I think this is, the main outcome that I'm taking from today's discussion about, the things that this bright future can bring. We took an example, when you think about another aspect of this AI is really to build the testing lingo. And we started with the photo lingo. If you think about Google Photos has a very clear statement or very clear process on how the AI engine that analyzes photos and can understand from a photo whether it's a dog or a cat or a train, and from that point to find the same type of photo across all my albums as a user of a Google Photo. We want to basically do the same with testing and create the same lingo on testing. And I mentioned earlier that 80% of the issues had the same pattern. This is exactly what we see. We see, either from analyzing, different breadcrumbs that we can understand on the behavior of the device or the application under the hood, or analyzing NLP, as Diego mentioned earlier, running those, different strings of text that we can identify and understand that there is a pattern here, or even using image analysis, image recognition, as this is the most obvious issue of functional testing or UI testing. You have images that can be analyzed and very easily validate whether some conditions are happening or not. This is one of the examples that we started actually recently. When functional failures occurs, in some cases there is something under the hood that actually happened. Pop-up is a classic example. Native update of the browser, native keyboard that pops up at some point and blocks some of the UI, or different messages that pops up on the screen from the application itself can give us a good notion, or even the notion of the home screen. Like I was trying to launch an application and click on one of the buttons, but I got a response or a report that says that my test failed due to some kind of an element that wasn't found. But in the background, what I actually see is the home screen of the device, which can basically say that one of a couple of cases could happen. One of them is that my application crashed, and therefore I got my home screen. Or another one that would say that the app wasn't even launched. So under the hood, there are different breadcrumbs that we started to collect using sets of rules with an AI engine that helps us understand what was, happening, and from that point to bring that to the user's notion. Like in this example, we saw that there is kind of a pop-up on the application, and the actual functional failure said that there was some kind of timeout, but the actual issue is not that there was a timeout that prevented from us to find that element. There was a native pop-up on the screen that we should, I'm sorry, in this case it's an application pop-up that should be handled properly in order to overcome the case. So if the data can really be more actionable for the user when reviewing those test results, and the next step for us is to use AI to dismiss those cases during runtime, not just to float the problems that we find as part of the report, but to actually react using AI when we understand that a different set of conditions happen. That's really the future of AI and the area that can really optimize testing or exclude different flakiness element and noise that is created. For example, identifying the cases where devices are in use or where devices are disconnected instead of marking those cases as failures. Another area is to be able to categorize or to create different buckets of failures and help the user from this point to really understand what is the impact of different types of failure reason and build from that a working plan on what should be fixed first and what are the, I would say, highest impact issues that can be found at any given moment as part of that test automation. So, the last issues that I had to share here, and I know that this view is probably have a lot of text bullet, but each practitioner today that develop automation, that writes actually code, will find these steps, the authoring and the maintenance and the execution and so on, as part of the end-to-end flow. Test automation, there is a big community of people that write automation and even manual testers with low coding skill. For them, we see a trend of growth in codeless test development as one area that I've mentioned today, and AI can really groundbreak different areas. So the opportunity for AI to build the same flow is really big these days. The adjustment, of processes is another area that we see that really requires more attention. And as people, adjust their flows today, when AI takes part of this game, we truly see needs, as we talked earlier, Diego, about DevOps, that it's all about tools, people, and processes. There will be some changes in the process. There will be some changes in the landscape that we're all going through, and probably we'll see some kind of mix of these columns. I hope that, you agree with me, Diego, as shift left, will be from part of the things in the left column to the right. So we'll see shift right according to this table. There will be kind of mix and match. Is this something that you also feel, Diego?
Well, yes, I think I would actually add the third column to that. Means basically even more shift right than this, right? The manual, the so-called business tester. But yeah, I think that's this is a very pragmatic, list of things that can happen. Hey, Tzvika, I think one question I saw that came up, and maybe it's worth responding to that question because I know that this comes up over and over. But machine learning, AI is great. Machine learning is a different way, algorithms, right, that people can use now. But the question is, where do we get the data, right? How if a bank wants to use this technology, how do they get the data? Who sources it? Does the tool come with the data? Do they have to wait 3 months to collect the data? I guess that's a typical question. I'm wondering if you've in your experiments, if you have any suggestions for that.
So I think it's a very good question, Diego. I think that open source tools today for testing are really powerful for the IDE level, the framework level, but reporting levels and the ability to aggregate the data. What we see in many cases is stitching of different elements, which is not in all cases the right answer for enterprise customer. Like if you're in the banking industry and you want to focus on continuous testing, you don't want to develop your own reports and dashboards and tool. And we see a mix and match of different tools and visualization elements and tailoring on top of that, different machine learning capabilities. I think that it's clear for everyone that with the power of analytics, the power of the technology behind that, using machine learning, reporting as a service is becoming more and more a need for those organizations. The mountains of data that are exponentially growing requires organization to feed that to be based on cloud technologies in majority of cases, as you don't want really to host all the data in kind of local mounts, again with all the sensitivity aspects of maintaining data on an enterprise grade level. But the focus is not the management of the tool, the orchestration of the tool, and kind of the stitching of the tool. It's more about the value that you can get out of these tools, and using all those buzzwords, and put them into the works on a constant basis is something that you probably, you need to invest some time in tool selection. Again, part of the equation that you were mentioning earlier about DevOps, and decide where do you want to actually put your focus. Do you want to test more innovation and qualify more kind of new features to the market, or you want to build everything, although there are kind of good tools on the shelf, tools that are available in the market and can be used? And I think that the SaaS approach here is the right approach, the way that you can actually consume reports as a service in that sense. I hope that this sheds more light on the issue that you just mentioned.
Yep. But
so with that in mind, sorry, please go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
So I want to try and spend the couple of last minutes that we have for this exciting discussion, Diego, to talk a little bit about predictions and where we see the market evolving. Let's start in a modest kind of approach in the next year or so, if you don't mind to share your kind of point of view on the bullets that we see here. I think these are areas that we have jointly agreed that we see the market evolving to, and I would really love to get your opinion about it.
Well, there's no doubts that last year we saw a huge amount of adoption in the area of Docker and containers, and that's really, containers don't come with, they go hand in hand with microservices. So I think the trend of microservices is important, and in 2019, I think. The API economy, which is kind of behind that trend, is going to continue to build up. And you mentioned cloud here as well, and really what we're seeing is, yes, there is a movement and a shift towards public cloud, but it's still very much hybrid, a lot of hybrid happening. I guess it depends, it's hard to kind of generalize, but it depends on, if you're talking about the type of tools, SaaS for tools is a great cloud approach, but it depends on the type of applications that really one wants to build. But in general, as a trend, prediction is that cloud, there's going to be more movement towards PaaS, platform as a service, tools moving to the cloud, and companies using those tools because it simply makes it easier to collaborate, right? Much easier to collaborate. And you see a lot of tied to the other things here, AI, you can see that a lot of the new AI APIs that vendors are proposing, they're on Azure, they're on Google Cloud Platform, and so forth. So I guess it ties into AI a little bit, where a lot of, because you can't, if you really have really deep models doing really hard stuff, and if you're clustering, for example, your bugs, that are coming over many years, there's a lot of data. You need specialized hardware. Well, the best way to do that is to use a cloud, I guess.
Of course.
So
if I
go ahead.
if I had to try and focus with the last minute that we have, you mentioned earlier, the walk, through the direction of continuous testing. My kind of interpretation and the way that we see that in Perfecto is like that continuous testing is more around everything, every day, different types of testing, different areas that were, outside of the testing cycle in many aspects, or were conducted manually. The last statement from your side, the impact of AI that we'll see around that in the coming year.
I think it's going to make it's going to augment. AI is really going to augment. I mean, you know, all the examples you gave were very interesting and augmenting developer testers, and I think just that augmentation is going to happen across the board with the different roles. I see there's a question here, also that talks about which are the optimal skills. I think for testing organizations, for continuous testing, you're still going to have probably somewhere in the organization traditional testing as well going on. But I would say with AI, it's going to give a little bit more increase and a role and space for business testers. Definitely going to help technical testers do a better job. And also, as you mentioned a lot of cases, increase and augment developer testers. And I think that's going to be key for continuous testing, because if you've got a lot of it can't become continue. It has to be fast if it has to be continuous. So it has to be automated, and therefore there's not just the automation of execution can be done faster if we make it smarter. So in other words, focus also on what's the right thing to automate rather than just automating everything, because even building automation costs, and I think AI can help a lot too, right, to make it smarter, to make testing smart. And that's,
I'm sure that we'll hear the word smart a lot this year. It's going to be a very exciting year. Diego, I would like to thank you again for your time and precious insights on the market. It was really a fun discussion, and look forward to the next one. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you, too.
Happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot for having me. Bye-bye.